Most people believe communication is about talking, about choosing the right words, about sounding confident. But what if communication isn't about what you say at all? What if it's about why you say it? Every day we speak at work, at home, online, yet somehow we still feel misunderstood, unheard, or disconnected. Not because we lack vocabulary, but because we've forgotten something far more important. Communication is not an exchange of information, it's an exchange of trust. The leaders who inspire us, the voices we remember, they don't speak more, they speak with intention. Today, I want to share 9 communication shifts, not tricks, not tactics, but mindset changes that will fundamentally change how you speak, how you listen, and how people respond to you. Because when you change how you communicate, you don't just change conversations, you change relationships, influence, and impact. Most people believe that communication starts with words. They think if they can find the right vocabulary, the right tone, or the right structure, they will be understood. But words are not where communication begins. Words are simply the delivery system. Real communication starts much earlier, in a place most people rarely examine, the reason behind why they are speaking in the first place. When you start with words, you focus on sounding good. When you start with why, you focus on being understood. The human brain is wired to respond to purpose before information. We don't fall in love with speeches, ideas, or leaders because they are well articulated. We fall in love with them because they resonate with something we already believe. When someone speaks without knowing why they are speaking, their message may be correct, but it feels empty. It lacks gravity. It lacks direction. And most importantly, it lacks meaning. That's why so many conversations feel forgettable. They are technically fine, yet emotionally hollow. Starting with why forces clarity. It answers a question the audience is silently asking. Why should I care? If the speaker doesn't know the answer, the listener certainly won't. The mistake many people make is assuming that the audience's job is to figure out the meaning. In reality, meaning is the speaker's responsibility. When you begin with why, you're not just sharing information, you're offering context. You're giving people a lens through which to interpret everything that follows. Think about the difference between saying, we need to improve communication at work, and saying, we need to improve communication because when people feel unheard, trust breaks down, and when trust breaks down, performance always suffers. The second doesn't sound more intelligent, but it sounds more intentional. It immediately signals that there is a deeper reason behind the message. People may not remember the exact words, but they remember how intentional it felt. Starting with why also changes how you speak. Your tone becomes steadier, your pace becomes more deliberate. You stop rushing to prove your intelligence and start focusing on sharing your belief. This is why leaders who inspire don't speak faster or louder, they speak with conviction. Conviction doesn't come from memorization, it comes from clarity of purpose. When you know why you're speaking, you don't need to impress anyone. You simply need to be honest. Many people avoid starting with why because it requires vulnerability. Facts are safe, data is safe. Opinions can be defended. But why comes from values, experiences, and beliefs. It exposes what matters to you, and exposing what matters always carries risk. Yet that risk is precisely what creates connection. People don't connect to perfection, they connect to authenticity. When your why is clear, people may not agree with you, but they will trust you. Starting with why also makes communication consistent. Without a clear why, messages change depending on mood, audience, or pressure. One day you say one thing, the next day something else. Not because you're dishonest, but because you're directionless. A clear why acts like a compass. It keeps your communication aligned even when circumstances change. The words may shift, but the intention stays the same, and consistency is what builds credibility over time. This principle applies to every form of communication, speeches, conversations, emails, even silence. When you speak to persuade without knowing why, people feel manipulated. When you speak to inform without knowing why, people feel bored. But when you speak from a clear why, people feel invited to listen, invited to think, invited to care. The message stops being about you and starts being about something bigger. Starting with why doesn't mean oversharing or becoming emotional for the sake of it. It means being intentional. It means asking yourself, before you speak, what change do I want this communication to create? Do you want trust? Do you want clarity? Do you want alignment? Do you want courage? When you answer that question honestly, your words naturally organize themselves around that purpose. When communication starts with words, it often ends in misunderstanding. When communication starts with why, even difficult conversations become easier to navigate. Disagreement feels less threatening because the intention is clear. Silence feels less awkward because the direction is known. People don't just hear you, they understand where you're coming from. Starting with why is not a technique, it's a discipline. It requires reflection before expression. It requires patience before persuasion. And once you practice it, you realize something powerful. Communication is not about saying more. It's about saying what matters for a reason that matters. To people who can feel that reason long before they fully understand the words, most people are taught to communicate logically. We're trained to present facts, statistics, features, and step-by-step explanations. We assume that if the argument makes sense, people will automatically agree. But human beings don't make decisions logically first. Logic helps us justify decisions we've already made emotionally. When communication focuses only on logic, it may inform the brain, but it rarely moves the heart. And without movement, nothing truly changes. Beliefs are the filter through which people interpret information. Two people can hear the same facts and reach completely different conclusions, not because one is smarter than the other, but because they believe different things about the world. Logic doesn't override beliefs, it passes through them. When a message ignores beliefs, it feels cold, distant, or irrelevant. When a message aligns with beliefs, it feels personal, even when it's addressed to a room full of people. This is why some speakers can say very little yet create massive impact. They're not explaining what to think, they're reminding people of what they already believe. When someone says something that resonates deeply, the listener often thinks, "That's exactly how I feel, I just didn't know how to say it." That reaction doesn't come from clever logic, it comes from belief alignment. The speaker didn't convince the audience, they reflected the audience back to themselves. Logic is important, but it has a specific role. Logic gives structure to beliefs. It gives credibility to emotions. It helps people explain their decisions to others. But logic alone doesn't inspire action. You can logically explain why exercise is important, why communication matters, or why leadership requires empathy, and people will nod in agreement. Yet agreement doesn't equal commitment. Commitment comes when people feel that the message matches who they are or who they want to be. Speaking to beliefs means understanding what your audience values before deciding what you want to say. It means recognizing that people don't show up as blank slates. They bring fears, hopes, identities, and experiences with them. When communication ignores that reality, it becomes transactional. When it honors that reality, it becomes relational. And relationships are what give words their power. Beliefs are often invisible, but their effects are obvious. They shape how people interpret tone, intention, and even silence. A logically perfect message delivered without belief awareness can still fail. Meanwhile, an imperfect message delivered with belief alignment can succeed. That's why people forgive mistakes in speakers they trust, but criticize flaws in speakers they don't. Trust is belief-based, not logic-based. When you speak to beliefs, your language shifts naturally. You use more than you. You focus less on instruction and more on shared values. You stop trying to win arguments and start trying to build understanding. This doesn't mean avoiding facts, it means framing facts in a way that connects to what people care about. The same data can feel threatening or empowering depending on the belief it's tied to. This approach also changes how you handle disagreement. When communication is purely logical, disagreement feels like opposition. Someone is wrong and someone must be right. But when communication is belief-centered, disagreement becomes information. It reveals what the other person values. It gives insight into their worldview. Instead of reacting defensively, you become curious. Curiosity lowers resistance. And lowered resistance opens the door to influence. Many people think speaking to beliefs means being emotional or persuasive in a dramatic way. It doesn't. It means being intentional about meaning. It means understanding that people don't remember bullet points. They remember how a message made them feel about themselves. Did it affirm their values? Did it challenge them respectfully? Did it make them feel seen or dismissed? Those emotional impressions outlast any logical structure. Beliefs also explain why repetition works. When a message aligns with belief, hearing it again doesn't feel boring, it feels reassuring. It feels like reinforcement, not redundancy. That's why great leaders repeat simple ideas over and over. They're not adding new logic each time. They're strengthening belief alignment. Each repetition deepens trust and clarity. Speaking to beliefs requires humility. It means accepting that you cannot force change through logic alone. You cannot argue someone into caring. You can only invite them into a perspective that feels meaningful. That invitation must respect who they are, not just where you want them to go. When people feel respected, they listen. When they feel lectured, they resist. This is why storytelling is so powerful. Stories bypass logic and go straight to belief. They allow people to see themselves in the message. They create emotional context without demanding agreement. A well-told story doesn't tell people what to think. It allows them to decide what they believe. And belief-driven decisions are the ones people stand by, defend, and act on long after the conversation ends. When communication speaks only to logic, it may sound intelligent, but it often feels empty. When it speaks to belief, even simple words carry weight. The message feels grounded, human, and real. People may question the facts, but they rarely question sincerity. And sincerity is what makes communication feel trustworthy. Over time, audiences don't follow speakers who are always right. They follow speakers who consistently speak from a place that aligns with what they believe to be true. Most people believe influence comes from speaking well, from having the right answer at the right time, from knowing what to say and how to say it. So they prepare their words, rehearse their points, and wait for their turn to talk. But the most influential communicators are rarely the ones who speak the most. They are the ones who listen the best, not because they are quiet, but because they are present. Listening is not a passive act. It's not simply waiting for sound to stop so you can start again. Real listening requires effort. It requires restraint. It requires you to set aside your own need to be heard long enough to truly understand someone else. And that's uncomfortable for many people because listening removes control. When you're talking, you're in charge of the message. When you're listening, you're opening yourself up to uncertainty. Yet trust is built in that uncertainty. People don't feel valued when you impress them with words. They feel valued when they feel understood. And understanding doesn't come from talking. It comes from listening deeply enough to hear not just what someone is saying, but why they are saying it. The emotion beneath the words, the belief behind the opinion, the fear or hope driving the message. Most conflicts don't exist because people disagree. They exist because people feel unheard. When someone feels unheard, they repeat themselves. They raise their voice. They sharpen their language. Not because they want to dominate, but because they want to matter. Listening diffuses that tension. It tells the other person, without interruption or correction, you matter enough for me to pay attention. Listening is powerful because it creates safety. When people feel safe, they speak more honestly. They stop performing. They stop defending. They stop choosing words carefully to avoid judgment. And when honesty enters the room, real communication begins. You can't solve problems that people are afraid to describe. You can't lead people who don't feel safe telling you the truth. Great listeners don't listen to respond. They listen to understand. That difference changes everything. When you listen to respond, your attention is split. Part of you is present and part of you is preparing your reply. The other person can feel that. They may not know why, but they sense it. When you listen to understand, your focus is undivided. Your body language softens. Your questions slow down. Your silence becomes intentional. Silence is one of the most underused tools in communication. Many people rush to fill it because silence feels awkward. But silence gives people space to think, space to reflect, space to say the thing they weren't sure they should say. Often, the most important part of what someone wants to communicate comes after a pause. If you interrupt that pause, you interrupt the truth. Listening also changes how people see you. When you listen well, you're perceived as wiser, calmer, and more trustworthy, even if you say very little. That's because people associate being heard with being respected, and respect amplifies influence. You don't need authority to lead a conversation when people feel respected. They offer you their attention willingly. This is especially true in leadership. Leaders who talk too much create dependency. People wait for instructions instead of thinking. Leaders who listen create ownership. People feel empowered to contribute, to challenge, to improve ideas. Listening doesn't weaken leadership, it strengthens it. It turns leadership into a shared responsibility instead of a solo performance. Listening also requires humility. It means accepting that you don't have all the answers, that other people may see things you don't, that your perspective is limited by your experience. When you listen with humility, you give yourself access to better information. And better information leads